Hey photographers, I just wanted to take a moment to let you know about the live Q&A I'll be doing with my buddy Mark Evers here on my YouTube channel on June 10th. And it's a chance for you to ask questions and get answers from us right then and there. It's a free event and it's going to be a lot of fun, so check out this link right here to join us. Hello photographers, my name is Spyros Heniadis and this is where I answer your photography questions and we learn about photography together. And it's Thursday, we're doing Q&A and we have a question today that came from PARTHA Dutta, who says he finds that there are cameras with 9, 11, 64 autofocus points, and he says, how does this help? Is 64 autofocus points better than 9? In theory, more autofocus points is better. Now, more autofocus points is one of the things that camera manufacturers continue to add to improve their cameras. And as I said, in theory, having more autofocus points is better because that's more chances for the camera to focus on exactly what you want the camera to focus on. So that's a good thing. The bad thing about that many autofocus points, in my opinion, is if you focus like I do, where you choose one specific autofocus point to focus on the subject that you want to focus on, getting through 64 or 120 autofocus points to the one that you want to use can take a minute or two, and that can be kind of a pain in the butt. But that being said, generally speaking, more autofocus points is better, especially if you're shooting moving subjects, because these tracking focus cameras will use all of those autofocus points to watch the scene and follow the subject that you're trying to focus on. And if you have 64, there's a much better chance that the camera's going to be able to follow that subject as it moves versus just having 9 focus points that are tracking and trying to follow that subject. So generally speaking, more autofocus points means that you are more likely to get better and more accurate focus. Now our next question comes from Arvik Agda, who says, "Dear Spyros, I always watch your videos and I am also a subscriber to your channel." So Arvik, I want to say thank you for being a subscriber and watching, and really I should say thank you to everybody who watches. I probably don't say that enough, so I just want to pause here for a moment and say thank you for watching this video. I appreciate that. Now Arvik says that he's using the D750 and he says, "My question is that every time I focus and recompose, the exposure changes so that I have to dial the shutter speed or change the ISO to correct the exposure after focusing and then recomposing the shot." So he says, how do I deal with this in manual exposure so I don't have to try to change my exposure and miss the shot that might pass me by while I'm working on this? And what's happening here is when you focus and recompose, the camera meter is constantly rereading the scene. So when you point the camera at the subject and you focus, if you also set your exposure when you're focusing, the camera's reading for the scene as you focus. When you recompose, the camera rereads the scene and it might change the exposure, telling you that the image is overexposed or underexposed based on the new reading, based on your recomposition of the scene. The way to deal with this is to first simply lock your exposure in where you want it for the subject you're photographing. And ideally, you're under light conditions that are generally speaking not changing. So once you have your exposure set the way you want it to be set, you can ignore what the exposure indicator tells you and just focus on your subject and shoot the shot when you have it focused. An example being if you're out for a parade, let's say. You have the parade coming by, and before any of the stuff you want to photograph comes by, you're going to point the camera at the parade and you're going to set your exposure settings in and you're going to take a test shot and see how it looks. And if the exposure is good, then you're probably not going to need to change it much. So then all you need to do is point the camera at the subject you want to shoot, focus the camera, recompose your shot, and take the picture. The thing you got to understand is when to pay attention to the camera meter and the exposure indicator and when you can ignore it. And as long as you know that your exposure settings are correct, you can ignore what the camera meter says and just focus your shot, recompose it, and shoot it as soon as the moment is right. And our last question this week comes from Frank Sreshta, who says he's looking to get an affordable flash for his Nikon D5200 camera. And he says he's planning on doing photography, portraits, outdoors, like at a home, and possibly shooting doing some weddings. So he's wondering what flash should he get. And then he has a follow-up question, is that he has heard flashes can short circuit the camera and actually damage the camera. And is it possible for that to actually happen? And if so, what can he do to prevent that? So first, the flash recommendation. There are lots of flashes out there. And if you're getting started in flash and you want to learn, there are a couple options I'd recommend. Now, I just reviewed the Aperlite YH700C, which is a great TTL flash, and it's available for Canon, but the Nikon version hasn't been out yet. So if you're looking for a TTL Nikon flash, I'd highly recommend the Yongnuo YN568EX TTL flash for Nikon. It's a really great flash. It's a very affordable flash, just over $100, and it's fully capable. It'll take care of everything you need to take care of. Now, bear in mind, you still need to learn how to use that flash to take effective portraits. So don't expect to buy a flash and just put it on the camera and take awesome wow portraits. That's a whole separate thing, but that is an excellent flash that you can work with. Now, to answer Frank's second question, yes, there are flashes that can actually short circuit and damage your camera. But if you're buying like a Yongnuo or a newer Nikon or any newer flash made for DSLRs, it's not going to be a problem. Where this issue can come up is if you take an older flash and you use it on a newer camera. The trigger voltages on older flashes are much higher than the trigger voltages on newer DSLR cameras. And so what can happen is if you put an older flash on a newer camera and then you shoot it, the voltage from the flash can fry the electronics on your camera. So new flashes, it's not going to be an issue. But if you have an old flash and you've been thinking, hey, I can use this on my new DSLR, do not do that until you check the voltages on both the flash and the camera and make sure that they're compatible. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's Q&A. And if you have questions that you would like me to answer, leave them down in the comments. And then do me a huge favor, would you? And like this video and subscribe to my channel. If you really like this video, maybe share it with your friends. But the most important thing you need to do is get out there and take some damn photos. I'll see you guys on Tuesday.